I never believed in the supernatural until that fateful summer. My family owned a small farm on the outskirts of a sleepy village. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and stories of ghosts and spirits were just bedtime tales to scare the kids. But that all changed when we got the goat. It was a scorching July afternoon when my father brought the creature home. He had found it at a local market, a scruffy black goat with piercing blue eyes. There was something unsettling about those eyes, but my father dismissed my concerns. "Just a goat," he said. "Nothing to worry about." The first night we had the goat, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing strange noises coming from the barn. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the usual sounds of the farm, but then I heard it. A voice. A low, raspy voice that sent chills down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I went to the barn to feed the animals. As I approached, the goat stared at me with those unnerving blue eyes. And then it spoke. "Hello." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. Goats don't talk. This was impossible. I must be hearing things, I thought. But the goat spoke again. "Don't be afraid." I backed away slowly, my mind racing. Was I losing it? I needed to tell someone, but who would believe me? Talking goats were the stuff of fairy tales, not real life. That evening, I confided in my best friend, Sarah. She was the only person I trusted with such a bizarre story. She listened intently, her eyes widening with each word. "We have to see it for ourselves," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. As night fell, we snuck out to the barn armed with flashlights and a growing sense of dread. The barn was eerily quiet, the only sound our footsteps crunching on the hay-strewn floor. We approached the goat's pen, and there it was, staring at us with those icy blue eyes. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The goat's mouth moved, and the same raspy voice emerged. "I am lost." We stumbled back, our flashlights flickering. This was real. The goat was speaking. But how and why? Before we could ask more questions, the barn door creaked open, and a cold wind swept through. The goat's eyes glowed brighter, and the voice grew louder. "Help me." Sarah and I exchanged terrified glances. This was just the beginning of something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. The next morning, Sarah and I couldn't stop thinking about the goat. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard its raspy voice echoing in my mind. We needed answers, but we didn't know where to start. How do you investigate a talking goat? Sarah suggested we visit Old Man Henderson. He was the village's unofficial historian, a recluse with a reputation for knowing all the local legends and secrets. If anyone could shed light on this mystery, it was him. We found Old Man Henderson sitting on his porch, surrounded by dusty old books and yellowing newspapers. He eyed us suspiciously as we approached, but his curiosity was piqued when we mentioned the goat. "A goat that talks, you say?" he muttered, stroking his grizzled beard. "Sounds like the old tale of the whispering shadows." He invited us inside and began to weave a story that sent shivers down our spines. According to legend, a long time ago, a sorcerer lived on our farm. He was obsessed with the idea of communicating with the dead. He believed that by binding a restless spirit to a living creature, he could bridge the gap between the worlds. The sorcerer's experiments were dark and dangerous. He used goats as his vessels, thinking their simplicity would make them ideal hosts. But one night, something went terribly wrong. The sorcerer vanished, and the farm was left haunted by whispers and shadows. The goats were found wandering the fields, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. "Your goat," Henderson said, his voice grave, "is likely one of those cursed creatures. It's not just talking, it's a conduit for the dead." We left Henderson's house with a sense of impending doom. This wasn't just a strange anomaly. It was a link to a dark past that refused to be forgotten. We decided to confront the goat again, this time prepared to ask the right questions. As night fell, we returned to the barn. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and every creak and rustle seemed amplified. The goat was waiting for us, its blue eyes glowing in the darkness. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The goat's mouth moved, and the voice emerged, even raspier than before. "I am the sorcerer, trapped between worlds. You must help me find peace." Sarah and I exchanged terrified glances. How could we possibly help a trapped sorcerer? The goat continued, its voice growing more desperate. "The ritual, it must be completed. Find the book." The book. Old Man Henderson had mentioned the sorcerer's journal, filled with dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. If we could find it, maybe we could end this nightmare. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to search the farmhouse's attic. It was a place we rarely ventured, filled with dusty old furniture and forgotten memories. As we climbed the creaky stairs, a sense of foreboding washed over us. What if the book contained more than just answers? What if it held the key to something far more dangerous? In the attic, amidst the cobwebs and shadows, we found an old chest. Inside, buried under a pile of yellowing papers, was a leather-bound book. The cover was adorned with strange symbols, and the pages were filled with cryptic writings and dark illustrations. This was it, the sorcerer's journal. As we opened the book, a cold wind swept through the attic, and the shadows seemed to whisper all around us. The sorcerer's journal was heavy in my hands, the leather cracked with age. Sarah and I carefully turned the brittle pages, each one revealing dark secrets and arcane rituals. The symbols and illustrations were unlike anything we had ever seen, and the cryptic language seemed to whisper from the past. "This is it," Sarah murmured, her finger tracing a particularly elaborate drawing. "The ritual to bind and unbind a spirit." The instructions were detailed and complex. We needed specific ingredients and had to perform the ritual at midnight under a full moon, which was only 2 days away. But the most unsettling part was the final step. We had to draw blood. The ritual required a life force to bridge the gap between worlds. "Do you think we can do this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated. This was beyond anything we had ever imagined. We were just two teenagers trying to solve a mystery, not perform a dark ritual. But the goat's desperate plea echoed in my mind. We couldn't leave the sorcerer's spirit trapped, nor could we ignore the potential danger it posed. "We have to try," I said, steeling myself. "We'll gather the ingredients and be ready by the full moon." The next 2 days were a blur of preparation and mounting fear. We scoured the village for the necessary items: candles, herbs, and a silver dagger. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to draw us deeper into the sorcerer's dark legacy. Finally, the night of the full moon arrived. The farm was bathed in an eerie silver light, and the air was thick with anticipation. We set up the ritual in the barn, arranging the candles in a precise circle and scattering the herbs as instructed. The goat watched us with its unsettling blue eyes, its voice a constant whisper in the back of my mind. "Begin," it rasped. With shaking hands, I opened the journal to the ritual's page. We recited the incantations, our voices blending with the flickering candlelight. As the final words left our lips, a cold wind swept through the barn, and the goat's eyes glowed brighter. "Now," the goat's voice commanded, "the blood." I glanced at Sarah, who nodded grimly. I took the silver dagger and made a small cut on my palm, letting the blood drip onto the goat's forehead. The moment the blood touched the goat, the barn was filled with a deafening roar. Shadows danced wildly on the walls, and the air crackled with energy. The goat's body convulsed, and its eyes burned with an intense blue light. The voice that emerged was no longer a whisper, but a powerful, resonant command. "Free me!" Suddenly, the barn door slammed shut, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence, and we could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on us. Just when we thought we couldn't bear it any longer, the shadows began to recede. The goat's body went limp, and the eerie glow in its eyes faded. A deep silence settled over the barn, broken only by our ragged breaths. "It's over," Sarah whispered, but we both knew it wasn't that simple. As we stood there, trying to process what had just happened, the goat's body began to change. It shriveled and decayed before our eyes, transforming into a pile of dust. The sorcerer's spirit was free, but at what cost? In the days that followed the ritual, a heavy sense of unease settled over the farm. The air seemed colder and the shadows longer. Sarah and I tried to return to normal life, but the memory of that night haunted us. We had freed the sorcerer's spirit, but something felt terribly wrong. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself back in the barn, staring at the spot where the goat had turned to dust. The journal lay open on a nearby table, its pages fluttering in the breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had missed something crucial. Just then, Sarah burst into the barn, her face pale with fear. "I found something," she panted, holding up an old photograph. It showed a man in dark robes, standing in front of our farmhouse. His eyes were piercing blue, just like the goat's. "This is the sorcerer," she said, her voice trembling. "But look at the date. This photo was taken decades after the sorcerer supposedly vanished." A chill ran down my spine. If the sorcerer had survived, what had we really freed? As we pored over the journal again, a realization dawned on us. The ritual we had performed wasn't just to free a trapped spirit. It was to transfer the sorcerer's essence into a new vessel. But where did it go? I asked, dread creeping into my voice. Before Sarah could respond, a shadow passed over the barn. We turned to see my father standing in the doorway, his eyes glowing an eerie blue. A twisted smile spread across his face. "You meddling fools," he hissed, his voice layered with the sorcerer's rasp. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Panic surged through me. My father, possessed by the sorcerer, stepped forward, his presence radiating malevolence. "This body will serve me well," he sneered, "but your interference cannot go unpunished." Sarah and I backed away, our minds racing. We had to stop him, but how? The journal contained countless dark rituals, but none on reversing possession. Desperation took hold as the sorcerer advanced, raising a hand that crackled with dark energy. Suddenly, a thought struck me. The sorcerer's power was tied to the ritual we performed. If we could undo it, maybe we could banish him once and for all. I grabbed the journal and flipped to the ritual page, searching for any clues. "There," Sarah pointed to a small annotation at the bottom of the page. "To reverse the binding, invoke the light of purity." "What's the light of purity?" I asked frantically. Sarah's eyes widened with realization. "The silver dagger. Silver is a symbol of purity." We lunged for the dagger, but the sorcerer was faster. He lashed out with a bolt of dark energy, sending Sarah crashing into the wall. I grabbed the dagger and turned to face the sorcerer, my heart pounding with fear and determination. "This ends now," I declared, raising the silver blade. The sorcerer laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the barn. "You cannot defeat me. I am eternal." With a surge of courage, I plunged the dagger into the ground, calling out the words of the counter-ritual. A blinding light filled the barn, and the sorcerer's scream of rage and agony reverberated through the air. The light intensified, and the sorcerer's hold on my father began to waver. "No!" the sorcerer cried, his voice fading as the light grew stronger. "You cannot!" In a final burst of brilliance, the sorcerer was expelled from my father's body, leaving him crumpled on the ground. The light subsided, and an eerie silence fell over the barn. Sarah struggled to her feet, her face bruised but determined. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I knelt beside my father, relieved to see the blue glow gone from his eyes. "I think so," I said, my voice shaking with exhaustion and relief. "We've stopped him." But as we helped my father to his feet, a nagging doubt lingered in my mind. The sorcerer might be gone, but the darkness he had brought into our lives would never truly disappear. In the weeks following the confrontation, life on the farm slowly began to return to normal. My father had no memory of the events and seemed to be recovering well. However, Sarah and I couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The barn, once a place of simple farm chores, now held an air of foreboding. One night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a familiar, chilling sound, a whisper. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but it grew louder, more insistent. I sat up, heart pounding, and strained to listen. The whispering was coming from the barn. I knew I had to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight and the silver dagger, I made my way outside. The night was still, the moon casting long shadows across the fields. As I approached the barn, the whispers grew clearer, more coherent. "They're not gone," the voices seemed to say. "They will never be gone." Inside the barn, the air was thick with an oppressive energy. The spot where the goat had turned to dust was now a dark stain on the floor, and the shadows seemed to dance in the corners, mocking me. I shone the flashlight around, trying to find the source of the whispers. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the darkness. It was Sarah, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "I heard it too," she whispered. "The voices." We exchanged a look of grim determination. We had to find the source of the curse and end it once and for all. Together, we delved deeper into the barn, following the whispers. They led us to an old, rotting trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of hay. With a sense of dread, we pried open the trapdoor. A narrow staircase descended into the earth, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, we found a small, stone-walled chamber. In the center was a crude altar, covered in strange symbols and dried blood. "This must be where the sorcerer performed his rituals," Sarah said, her voice trembling. We searched the chamber, hoping to find something that could help us. Among the rubble, we discovered a small, ornate box. Inside was a blackened piece of parchment covered in the same strange symbols as the altar. The whispers grew louder as I held the parchment, their meaning becoming clear. "The final binding," the voices intoned. "To seal the darkness forever, a sacrifice must be made." A chill ran down my spine. The sorcerer's curse required a life to end it. But whose life? I looked at Sarah, her face mirroring my horror. Could we sacrifice ourselves to end this nightmare? Before we could decide, the shadows in the chamber began to writhe and coalesce, forming into the figure of the sorcerer. His eyes blazed with blue fire, and his voice echoed with malevolent glee. "You thought you could defeat me," he sneered, "but darkness cannot be destroyed so easily." Desperation surged through me. We had to act fast. I glanced at the parchment and back at the sorcerer. "We'll sacrifice you," I declared, raising the silver dagger. The sorcerer laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "You cannot harm me with that," he said. "Only a willing sacrifice can end this." I realized then what needed to be done. Steeling myself, I turned to Sarah. "It has to be one of us." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded. "Together," she said, her voice steady. We joined hands, standing before the altar, and recited the words on the parchment. The chamber filled with a blinding light, and the sorcerer's scream of rage and fear echoed around us. The light grew brighter, enveloping us in its purity. In that moment, I felt a strange peace. The sorcerer's presence faded, the shadows dissipating into nothingness. The whispers ceased, replaced by a profound silence. When the light faded, we found ourselves back in the barn, the trapdoor sealed once more. The air was clear, the oppressive energy gone. We had done it, we had ended the sorcerer's curse. But the price had been high. As we looked around the barn, a sense of loss washed over us. We had saved the farm, but the darkness had left its mark. We would never be the same. The days following our final confrontation with the sorcerer were surreal. The barn, once a place of dark rituals and whispers, was now eerily quiet. The oppressive energy that had lingered for so long was finally gone, but the memory of our sacrifice hung heavily over us. Sarah and I tried to return to our daily routines, but everything felt different. The farm seemed more vibrant, the animals calmer, but inside, we were haunted by the events that had transpired. My father, oblivious to the horrors he had unknowingly been part of, continued his work with renewed vigor, grateful for what he believed was a natural shift in the farm's fortunes. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, she broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be the same again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, the pain and weariness etched into her features mirroring my own feelings. "I don't know," I admitted. "We've been through so much, but I think we have to find a way to move forward." Sarah nodded, though her eyes were distant. "I keep thinking about what the sorcerer said, that darkness cannot be destroyed so easily. Do you think there's a chance he might come back?" The thought sent a shiver down my spine. We did everything we could to end his curse. If he ever returns, we'll be ready. We've learned so much about his dark magic. We won't let him take over our lives again. We sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of our shared burden a silent bond between us. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I felt a strange sense of resolve. We had faced unimaginable horrors and survived. We had to believe that we could overcome whatever came next. The next morning, we decided to go through the Sorcerer's Journal one last time. We needed to understand everything we had dealt with and ensure that no remnants of his dark magic remained. As we carefully flipped through the pages, a small, folded piece of paper slipped out. Curious, we unfolded it to reveal a hand-drawn map. It depicted the farm and the surrounding area, with a marked location deep in the nearby woods. Next to the mark, there was a single word, lair. "This must be where the sorcerer conducted his darkest rituals," Sarah said, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to destroy whatever is there." Armed with the silver dagger and the knowledge we had gained from the journal, we ventured into the woods. The forest was dense and foreboding, but we pressed on, following the map. As we approached the marked location, the air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over us. Finally, we reached a clearing. At its center was a small, dilapidated hut. The air around it crackled with dark energy, and the ground was littered with bones and remnants of rituals long past. We knew this was the heart of the sorcerer's power. "We need to burn it," I said, my voice firm. "We can't let any trace of his magic remain." We gathered dry wood and kindling, forming a makeshift pyre around the hut. As we struck the match and set the wood ablaze, the dark energy seemed to pulse, fighting against the flames. But the fire grew stronger, consuming the hut and everything within it. The ground shook, and a piercing scream echoed through the forest as the sorcerer's lair was reduced to ash. The dark energy dissipated, replaced by a sense of calm and finality. We had done it, truly, finally, ended the sorcerer's curse. As we walked back to the farm, the weight that had been pressing on our shoulders lifted. The farm looked brighter, the future a little less daunting. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, our bond unbreakable. The weeks after we burned the sorcerer's lair were marked by a palpable sense of peace. The farm flourished, and the oppressive energy that once haunted us was gone. My father, now fully recovered, went about his work with renewed vigor, unaware of the horrors that had transpired. Sarah and I, though still haunted by memories, found solace in the knowledge that we had ended the sorcerer's curse. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with a hopeful look in her eyes. "Do you think we can really move on from this?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I nodded, feeling a sense of determination. We faced unimaginable darkness and survived. If we can do that, we can overcome anything. The next day, we decided to make some changes. The barn, once a place of fear, needed to be transformed. We spent days cleaning and renovating, painting the walls a bright, welcoming color and replacing old, creaky boards. As we worked, laughter and a sense of normalcy returned to our lives. In the midst of our efforts, we found an old box hidden in the barn's rafters. Inside were letters and photographs from the farm's early days. They depicted a time of joy and prosperity, a stark contrast to the darkness we had endured. Among the letters was one from the original owner, addressed to his descendants. It spoke of resilience, love, and the strength to overcome any obstacle. Reading those words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. The farm had a legacy of hope and perseverance, and it was up to us to continue that tradition. We decided to host a community gathering to celebrate the farm's revival and bring everyone together. The day of the gathering was perfect. The sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and food. Friends and neighbors arrived, their faces lighting up as they saw the transformed barn. We shared stories, laughter, and hope, creating new memories to replace the old, haunting ones. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah and I stood together, watching the guests enjoy themselves. A sense of fulfillment washed over me. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The sorcerer's curse was a thing of the past, and the farm was once again a place of life and joy. But even as we celebrated, we knew we could never forget the lessons we had learned. The darkness had left its mark, but it had also brought us closer and made us stronger. We were no longer just survivors. We were guardians of the farm's legacy, determined to protect it from any future threats. In the quiet moments that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything we had been through. The whispers, the rituals, the sorcerer's malevolent presence. It all seemed like a distant nightmare. But in the end, it had taught us the value of courage, resilience, and the power of hope. As Sarah and I looked out over the farm, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, I felt a deep sense of peace. The shadows of the past had been banished, and a bright, hopeful future lay ahead. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, ready to embrace whatever challenges the future might bring. Stay tuned for our next story, where we delve into another chilling tale of mystery and suspense. Until then, remember to hold on to hope and never let the shadows of the past define your future.